Don't touch the chicken in the fridge. It's mine. You don't have to eat it. My daughter-in-law forbade her son to eat at home. Before we begin, hit subscribe so you don't miss the ending to this one, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. This story gets messy in the way families do. Stay with me. I was 68 years old the day I stepped off that Greyhound with a lavender suitcase and a carton of my famous pecan pralines tucked under my arm like a peace offering. Atlanta summer had already steamed me medium well, and by the time I reached my son's little brick ranch in Decatur, my blouse clung to me in tired waves. The magnolia tree in his front yard was blooming in stubborn fists of white, as if even the petals were bracing for something. I rang the bell, smoothed my skirt, and told myself to breathe. I was only here for a week. A grandmother should be allowed to visit her child without calculating the temperature of the air between doorways. The door opened on a sliver, then wider, and there stood my daughter-in-law, Kayla, with her smile pulled tight like a rubber band you know is about to snap. She had a dish towel thrown over her shoulder like a badge and the kind of immaculate ponytail that tells you the sink is already empty and nobody better put a spoon in it. "Miss Johnson," she said, because after 10 years she still didn't call me Mama Ruth. "You made it." "Flight was canceled," I explained. "Bus did the best it could." I lifted the pralines. "Brought you a little sugar." Her eyes flicked to the candy, to my suitcase, to my shoes, to the clock on the stove I couldn't see. "That's nice." She stepped aside as if hospitality came with the tape measure. "Come on in." Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and a scented candle advertising something called ocean linen. I missed the honest smell of people, coffee, shampoo, onions sweating in a pan. My son Marcus came from the hallway in his work slacks and that shy grin he's had since his first birthday. "Mama," he said, and his voice softened on the second syllable the way it always does. He hugged me long enough to make the trip worth it. Behind him, 8-year-old Nora dashed out, threw herself into my lap without asking, and I thought, thank God some things don't change. We did our first hour dance. How was the ride? How's your back? How's your garden? How's work? How's the church choir? I asked after Kayla's mother, and she mentioned Pilates and blood orange smoothies, and I smiled as if that were a meaningful answer. We kept the conversation on the surface where it wouldn't cut us, but from the corner of my eye I watched Kayla move through that kitchen like a museum guard. The refrigerator door opened and closed with exactitude. The remote rested face down on the arm of the couch as if sleeping with one eye open. My suitcase sat by the door like a child in trouble waiting to be told where it could exist without offending anybody. "If you want to freshen up," Kayla said, "we made up the guest room." Her voice made guest sound like a favor drawn from a finite reserve. I took my lavender suitcase down the hall. The guest room used to be Marcus's drum room back when the band practiced gospel standards and annoyed the neighbors. Now it held a trundle bed dressed in gray, 2 decorative pillows that did not intend to be touched, and a little note card on the dresser. "Welcome, Ruth. Love, M and K." I placed the pralines on the dresser beside the card. The sweetness looked lonely next to the handwriting. When I returned, Marcus was at the thermostat, swiping it down 2 degrees. "Just to take the edge off for Mama," he said. "Uh-huh," said Kayla, a tidy hum of disapproval that landed somewhere between flirt and frown. "Power bill came yesterday." "I'll pitch in," I said, and meant it, but the hum stuck in the air like a mosquito you can hear but can't swat. Around supper time, the neighborhood turned gold and the feeling in the house tightened. Kayla moved like a conductor preparing to scold a symphony, pots and lids and measuring cups lined up like instruments. I offered to help, but she said, "No, No, sit down. Everything's timed. When I perched on the stool at the edge of the counter, she nudged the stool back with a hip and a smile that was not a smile. Not there. That's my prep space. "'Kay," Marcus said, gentle. "What? I'm cooking." She pulled a package of chicken thighs from the fridge and set them beside a little bowl of marinade. "We're doing lemon pepper with broccoli and quinoa. Nora's got ballet later." "Sounds good," I said, trying to swallow the word quinoa as if it were a marble. I watched her shake seasoning with fast, precise movements and tried to ignore how my fingers twitched to get in there with a cast iron and some garlic. I told myself this was her kitchen. I told myself to mind my manners the way my own mother taught me. When you are the guest, you learn the house rhythm and dance to it. But there's rhythm, and then there's a metronome. When Nora asked if she could watch cartoons, Kayla's answer came quick. "Screen time's already done today." When I reached for the remote to turn on the news at a whisper, she said, bright and light, "We've been doing a no TV in the evenings reset, Miss Johnson. It helps Nora sleep. And the electric." I set the remote down like a guilty spoon. Marcus said nothing. He stretched his back, looked at the floor, and asked me about my roses. We talked about the late frost and how it bit the tender buds, and I pretended not to notice the way my son avoided eye contact with his wife as she moved around him like a traffic cone. If you think the television was the whole of it, you don't yet know the shape of this story. The slightest things tell on people, and that night it wasn't the remote or the thermostat that tattled. It was a sentence that slipped out of Kayla's mouth like a penny from a tight fist. "Don't touch the chicken in the fridge, okay?" she said to me, cheerful as customer service. "It's mine. You don't need it." For a second, I didn't think I'd heard right. Words lose their edges when they're too sharp to belong in a polite room. I looked at my son, at his careful shoulders, at his lips pressing together as if he were ironing a sentence that might wrinkle us all. "Mama won't touch your meal prep," he said quietly. My heart did that old lady thing where it nags and whispers my age back to me. I laughed, a thin, papery sound. "Baby, I'm 68, not a raccoon. If I need something to eat, I can fix myself a little something. I brought groceries money." Kayla's eyebrows ticked up in that quick, surprised way, like I'd offered to tip God for sunlight. "Oh, no, I mean, of course. There's some yogurt." "Some yogurt?" The words sat on the counter between the chicken and my pride, white and sour. We ate dinner at the dining table that had never tasted a scratch. The lemon pepper was fine. The broccoli was crisp. The quinoa did its best to pretend it had a personality. Nora told me about her class and her best friend, Harmony, who wore a tutu every day and had 2 missing teeth like a little jack-o'-lantern. Marcus laughed in all the right places. Kayla kept the conversation on rails, quick, bright, safe. When I offered to wash up, she put her hands on mine, soft and firm. "No, really. The routine works best if I finish everything. It's like muscle memory." "I see," I said, and I did. I saw a life, arranged like a tiny museum where nothing must be added that wasn't on the placard. I saw my son living in that museum, careful not to breathe on the glass. That night, in the trundle bed that squeaked if I dreamed too suddenly, I wrote a list in the Notes app on my old phone. Bring groceries tomorrow, take Nora to the park, ask Marcus to breakfast, just us. Remind myself to say less and watch more. And at the bottom, where I meant to stop, I wrote, that chicken remark. Don't let it pass. Because grief has made me quieter in these last months since my Harold died, but it has not made me smaller. People confuse those two. They think because you're soft, you are weak. Because you listen, you will obey. My softness has teeth when it must. Some nights a house tells on itself when the day is done. Pipes clank. A refrigerator hums just a little louder than it should. Someone in the next room sighs like a man carrying a bag of rocks he chose and now resents. I lay awake and listened as if the drywall had a confession. Somewhere down the hall I heard whispering. A woman's voice, quick and low, a man's voice, slower, careful. I didn't press my ear to the door. I'm old, not rude. Still, I heard enough to know the next day would ask something more of me than good manners. And I promise you this, when the morning came and my daughter-in-law found me in front of the refrigerator, the real story began. Morning light came into that kitchen like the truth, soft at first, then bright, then impossible to ignore. I woke early out of habit and grief and the ordinary blessing of age. My body knew coffee time without consulting a clock. I moved quietly, not to wake the household, and set a kettle on the stove. My hand hovered over the switch a long second, remembering the hum from the night before. Power bill came yesterday, as if heat itself were a character I needed permission to invite in. Lord, I muttered, I have paid for more electricity than this house has used in its lifetime, and turned on the burner. The refrigerator canvas whispered when I opened it. Inside was a city of labeled containers. Mon lunch, Mon dinner, Nora's snacks, do not touch, with a smiley face, Kayla's smoothie base, and the chicken, marinating in a Ziploc bag like contraband. I wasn't after any of it. I wanted a splash of milk for my coffee, maybe a piece of fruit. I reached for a lonely peach in the crisper, freckled and honest. Kayla appeared in the doorway like an alarm. "Miss Johnson," she said, too bright, too fast, bathrobe cinched in a perfect bow. "Morning." "Good morning," I said, holding the peach. "Hope you don't mind I helped myself to this." She blinked, a smile unwavering. "That's fine. I just..." Her eyes darted to the chicken bag. "Remember, I'm doing a specific plan this week. The portions are set, so the macros, well, it's just dialed in, so the chicken's mine. Marcus can grab a protein bar if he needs it, and Nora's snacks are pre-counted." "Baby," I said gently, "I've raised a man and buried a husband. I know the difference between a snack and a boundary." Her smile twitched, recovered. "I'm sure." She crossed to the coffee station, reached past my kettle, and turned off the flame. "We've been doing a pour-over to save power. The electric was..." She made a face like a lemon wedge. "Anyway, no big deal. I'll make a pot. Marcus likes it this way." Something in me stood up without my permission. Not anger, not yet. It was older than anger, and calmer too. Call it memory. Call it dignity when it opens its eyes after a long nap. I set the peach on the counter, washed my hands like I was about to scrub in for a surgery nobody else understood. "Young lady," I said quietly, because quiet lands heavier, "I am a guest in this home. I will honor your routines with good manners. But do not talk to me like I am a child in your classroom. I don't need your chicken, and I don't need your permission to boil water." She went very still. We listened to the refrigerator hum like a choir of bees. Somewhere down the hall a door creaked, the sleepy sound of my son. Kayla recovered into cheer. "Of course," she said. "I didn't mean... I just have a system. When things get off the system, I spiral." She laughed in a way that asked me to join. I did not. Marcus came in, hair flattened on one side, tie draped around his neck. "Morning," he said. He kissed Kayla's forehead, then mine, and exhaled when he saw my face. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. Kayla was just explaining the chicken economy. The joke fell flat and stayed there, so I added, "I'm going to the store after breakfast. I'll buy my own groceries and a little cooler for the guest room so your plan can live its best life." Kayla flushed right to the ears. "That's not necessary." It is, I said, for the peace of this household. We pretended to reset. She made the pour-over. I sliced the peach like it might thank me for my patience. Marcus stood between us the way men sometimes do when they don't know how to stretch far enough to touch two truths at once. Nora tumbled in eventually. Hair wild, teeth unbrushed, a sunbeam with elbows. "Grandma, can you come to the park after school?" she asked. "That's the plan," I said, and locked eyes with Kayla, who folded her arms around her robe as if hugging herself counted as a decision. After school drop-off, when Marcus had gone to work and the house had no one left to perform for, Kayla and I cleaned in parallel like two storms circling the same coastline. I took the guest sheets to the washer. She vacuumed under the couch in straight lines as if geometry were a moral virtue. I let the silence sit between us like a careful guest. When the washer chimed, I folded my hands and decided the time for defense had ended. "Kayla," I said, soft but not small, "sit a minute." She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the couch, spine rigid enough to slice bread. Her eyes did that flicker thing people's eyes do when their brain is measuring risk. "When I got married," I began, "my mother-in-law ran her kitchen like a ship. First year I starved on routine and pride. One afternoon she snapped at me for reaching for the wrong skillet, and I snapped right back. I told her, 'In my house, that tone would turn your tongues bitter.' We learned each other after that, mostly because we had to. But neither of us would have learned a thing without a boundary." She swallowed. "Are you drawing a boundary?" "I am making one plain enough to read without your glasses." I leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I came here because my son invited me, because he loves me, and because my house is quiet these days. I will not be treated like a trespasser on a lawn I helped water. I won't fight over chicken or electricity or the remote. I'll buy what I consume. I'll follow reasonable rhythms. But you will not talk to me as if I am a problem to be managed." She stared at me as if I had turned into a person, which is sometimes exactly what happens when we stop apologizing for existing. The lines around her mouth softened an inch. "I didn't mean to be rude," she said finally. When things aren't controlled, I spiral. My mama kept a house where anything out of place meant yelling, and I promised myself I'd never let it get messy. "It's already messy," I said, and let the kindness in my voice share the sentence with the truth. "But it's the kind we can clean?" For a blink, we were two women with our mothers standing behind us like ghosts with opinions. She looked so young in her robe and ponytail and armor. I did what women like us sometimes forget to do. I left her dignity on the table and took only my own. "I'm headed to the store," I said, standing. "I'll be back in an hour." At the supermarket, I moved like a woman who knows exactly what her kitchen should taste like. Eggs, milk, butter, a small pack of chicken thighs, mine, a sack of sweet potatoes, collard greens, a bag of ice, a little dorm-size cooler on clearance. I bought flowers for the dining table because sometimes the room needs another opinion. Back at the house, I stocked my cooler and slid it into the guest room like a quiet revolution. At 3:30, we collected Nora. She chattered about pliés and snacks that were not to be touched and a field trip scheduled for Friday. In the rearview mirror, I watched Kayla watching me, her face a weather report that didn't know yet if it would rain. "Grandma," Nora said, "can you make your mac and cheese Friday? We have a picnic." "You know I can," I said, "but we'll check with your mama's plan." Kayla opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "We could make that work," she said slowly, "if we plan servings." That night, I cooked in my lane, meaning my cooler, my groceries, my pot on a back burner I had cleared with words and cash. The house smelled like garlic and onions trying to apologize to lemon cleaner. Marcus came home to that smell and exhaled a whole day's worth of holding his breath. He kissed his daughter, his wife, me. We ate our separate meals at a shared table, an imperfect truce with real food. After dinner, when Nora twirled herself into exhaustion and the dishwasher hummed, Marcus walked me to the porch. Evening gathered under the magnolia tree in a way that made me miss my husband and feel him close in the same breath. "Mama," Marcus said, voice low, "thank you for handling it." "Boy," I said, "I didn't handle it. I named it. There's difference." He rubbed his jaw. "Kay's particular." "She's scared," I said, "of mess, of noise, of anything she can't measure. You've accommodated fear so long it thinks it pays rent." He winced. "I want peace." "Then build it," I said. "Don't just avoid war." Inside, I heard the refrigerator open and close, the soft sound of decisions being made. I didn't know, not yet, how far this would go. The thermostat, the TV, the chicken, all of it stepping stones towards something bigger than any of those little things. But I felt the shift in the air. Defense had ended. A different drum was picking up the beat. Tomorrow I would discover the bill with my name on it taped under the fruit bowl, and the game would change in a way nobody at that table expected. Morning in that house began like a handshake no one wanted to finish. Kayla moved through her kitchen in quiet, tight circles, her robe cinched so neatly it could have been stitched to her ribs. My little cooler hummed softly in the guest room, a steady reminder that I had carved out a patch of autonomy on foreign soil. Marcus had already gone to work, leaving only a faint cologne trail and the dent of his coffee mug in the sink, a dent Kayla erased with a sponge before the coffee ring had time to dry. I took my cup out to the porch, letting the humid air wrap around me in a way her politeness never could. I hadn't planned to stir the pot that day, but pots don't sit still in a house where one person claims the air, the light, and now the food. My plan was simple. Take Nora to school, pick up a few things from the farmer's market, make myself useful. But as soon as Kayla stepped into the guest room doorway and eyed my cooler, the air shifted. "So, you really went and bought one," she said, tilting her head as if the little white box were a loaded gun. "I told you I would," I answered. "Keeps your meal plan neat and my dignity intact." Her mouth curled just enough to show she thought dignity was an outdated accessory. "It just feels excessive." I sipped my coffee. "Boundaries usually do to the person who's been crossing them." She blinked, not in offense, but in the way a person blinks when they feel seen and don't much care for it. We dropped Nora off without incident, though I noticed the way Kayla leaned over to tighten the straps on her daughter's backpack, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. Control isn't a habit for her. It's a lifeline. Back home, I spread my market finds on the counter. Collards, tomatoes still warm from the sun, and a loaf of sourdough that cracked under my hand like it had been waiting to breathe. Kayla glanced over from the sink. "I didn't realize you'd be cooking." "I didn't realize I needed permission," I said, cutting into the bread. "Don't worry, I'll do it in my lane. That's what the cooler's for." The line between us, invisible but undeniable, drew itself thicker. Around noon, she busied herself with her laptop at the dining table while I worked in the kitchen. I hummed a little. Not loud enough to be rude, but enough to remind the room I was there. The collard simmered with onion and a whisper of smoked paprika, the kind of smell that makes walls soften. Kayla looked up once, twice, then said, "You know, the smell of cooked greens lingers for days." I turned the burner down. "Sometimes that's a blessing." Her lips pressed together, sealing whatever reply she might have had. By the time Marcus walked in that evening, the house was a patchwork of silences, a mine comfortable, hers tight as piano wire. He kissed my cheek, glanced between us, and I could see in his eyes that he felt the weather changing. What none of us knew was that by the end of the week, this wouldn't just be about chicken or greens or the cooler in the guest room. It would be about who truly got to decide what kind of home this was and what kind of man my son wanted to be in it. The next morning was sharper somehow. Not in temperature. Georgia was still wrapped in its sticky August quilt, but in mood. I woke before the sun, listening to the low hum of my cooler like it was a heartbeat. The house was still. I slipped into the kitchen for coffee, careful not to set off another silent alarm. When the light finally broke through the blinds, Kayla appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her pressed khakis and a top the color of iced tea. She glanced at my mug. "We have a pour-over system," she said, as if the drip machine I'd used were an unlicensed weapon. "I'm aware," I answered. "This one's mine, from the cooler." Her jaw shifted, just enough for me to see the thought she didn't speak. Control was her oxygen, and I had just cracked the window. At 9:30, Marcus called from work. I picked up on the first ring. "Mama," he said in that careful tone, "Kay says you've been keeping separate groceries?" "That's right," I said. "It saves your marriage and my appetite." There was a pause, that deep male sigh of someone who wants peace so badly he'd sacrifice clarity to get it. "Just don't make it a thing, okay?" "It's already a thing," I told him, and hung up before my temper warmed up too much. By mid-morning, Kayla had moved into her second act, reclaiming territory. She stood in front of the fridge with a pad of paper and a pen, inventorying every shelf. I walked past with my laundry basket. "Writing a memoir?" I asked. "Just keeping track," she said without looking at me. "It's easier to plan when you know what you have." "And when you know what everyone else has," I murmured. Her head snapped up. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, setting my basket down. "Kayla, I came here to spend time with my son and my granddaughter, not to audition for a part in your household routine. You run a tight ship. I respect that, but I'm not cargo. I'm family." For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, pen in midair, eyes narrowing like shutters against too much light. Then she set the pad on the counter. "You think I'm the problem here," she said quietly, "but you don't see how you disrupt everything. Marcus and I have a rhythm. When you drop in, it all shifts." "That's what family does," I said. "We shift, we make room, and if you can't handle that, maybe the problem isn't my cooler or your chicken. Maybe it's that you don't want to make room for me at all." Her lips parted, but before she could answer, the front door opened. Nora bounded in from a play date, her laughter a small mercy. She wrapped her arms around my waist. "Grandma, can you make that mac and cheese today? Please?" I smoothed her hair, eyes still locked on Kayla. "I can, sweetheart," I said. "I just need to check with your mama's plan." Kayla's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. She nodded, but just once. "We'll make it work." It was the smallest crack in her armor, but even the smallest crack lets the light in, and I intended to see how far it could travel. Because deep down I knew this week wasn't ending with polite silences and careful smiles. It was going to end with a choice. Hers, mine, and Marcus's, about who truly belonged in this house and on what terms. And I had no intention of leaving as a guest who'd been managed into invisibility. The day didn't so much begin as it uncoiled. I woke in the pre-dawn hush, that hour when the air is heavy with what hasn't yet been said. My eyes opened to the faint hum of my little cooler in the corner, steady and dependable, The one thing in this house that didn't change its temperature depending on who walked into the room. The trundle bed creaked under my weight as I sat up, the springs voicing their protest to yet another morning without Harold beside me. I pulled on a cotton robe, the same faded rose-colored one I've had for years, and padded down the hall. My bare feet found every squeak in the floorboards, but the house didn't stir. The blinds in the living room let in slivers of early light, thin as sewing needles. And for a moment, I just stood in the kitchen doorway, breathing in the sterile scent of lemon cleaner. No onions softening in a skillet, no faint tang of coffee lingering from the night before. Just that flat, chemical kind of clean that feels like a warning not to make a mess. I had decided before bed last night that I would cook something for Nora this morning. She'd been asking since the day I arrived. Her little voice full of that polite hope children learn when they're around adults who make a lot of rules. "Grandma, can you make your mac and cheese one morning? Please," she'd said, and I had promised, because grandmother's promises aren't casual. I filled a pot with water, listening to the taps rush, echo in the silence. The sound alone made the kitchen feel less like enemy territory. I set it on the stove, flicked on the burner, and felt the quiet rebellion of it, using the gas without permission, as though I'd lit a candle in a locked room. From the cooler in the guest room, I'd brought sharp cheddar, real butter, and milk that hadn't been measured into a mason jar labeled with a date. I grated the cheese by hand, the shreds falling in soft curls onto the cutting board. My hands moved with a rhythm older than my marriage, older than Marcus, the way my mother had taught me, standing behind me in her own kitchen with the radio on and the windows open to let in the neighborhood noise. The butter hit the pan with a hiss, melting into a golden pool that welcomed the flour like an old friend. I whisked slowly, coaxing the roux into a pale cream before pouring in the milk. The scent began to bloom, rich and warm, curling into the corners of the room like a cat finding its place in the sun. I was standing there, lost in the memory of my own mother's voice telling me, slow and steady, when Kayla appeared in the doorway. She was dressed for the day already, khaki slacks without a wrinkle, a blouse the color of weak tea, her hair still damp but pulled back in a ponytail so neat it could have passed inspection. She carried a travel mug in one hand, but her eyes were on the stovetop, scanning it like a customs agent deciding what could pass through. "What's this?" she asked, her tone light but stretched too tight like a string about to snap. I didn't turn away from my whisking. "Breakfast for Nora. She's used to oatmeal. Keeps her balanced for ballet," she said, leaning against the frame like she was being casual. I smiled faintly. "She's 8, Kayla. A little cheese won't ruin her pirouettes." The corners of her mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Instead, she took a slow sip from her mug and watched me like I just moved a piece in a game she didn't realize we were playing. I focused on the sauce, watching it thicken, then folded in the cheese until the mixture turned the color of late afternoon sunlight. The sound of small feet padding down the hall broke whatever quiet war we were having. Nora shuffled in, hair a messy halo, eyes still heavy with sleep. Her face lit up when she saw the pot. That smells so good, Grandma." She climbed onto a chair at the table and looked at me like I'd hung the moon. I served her a small bowl, steam curling in the air between us. She dug in immediately, a little sigh escaping her lips. Kayla's gaze followed every bite, her fingers tapping her mug in a quiet staccato. "You know we have a breakfast routine," she said finally, her voice calm but edged. "It keeps the mornings smooth." I set the ladle down and met her eyes. "I've been fitting myself into other people's routines my whole life. This week I'm making room for mine. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Two women bound to the same man in different ways, neither willing to cede the kitchen floor. She broke first, glancing away to gather her purse. After the school drop-off, I returned to the house alone. The quiet was different without Nora's voice in it, sharper, more deliberate. I moved into the kitchen to tidy up, and that's when I saw it. A white envelope tucked under the fruit bowl, my name written in precise block letters across the front. I opened it slowly, already knowing it wasn't going to be a card. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed breakdown of the household's utility bills. Electricity, gas, water, internet, each with a number beside it. Several lines were highlighted in yellow. And at the bottom, in neat handwriting, "If you'd like to contribute, here's what your share would be." I stood there holding it, feeling the weight of it settle into my hands like something far heavier than paper. This wasn't a request. It was a statement. Not "thank you for helping," but "you cost us, and here's the receipt." I set the paper down carefully, like it might explode if handled wrong, and sat at the table. The lemon cleaner smell still lingered, bright and false. Outside, a lawn mower started up somewhere down the street, the sound dull and distant. This was no olive branch, it was a gauntlet. And as I stared at the neat little numbers, I realized something with perfect clarity. The war over chicken had just grown legs. By the time Marcus came home that evening, I had folded that paper twice and tucked it into my robe pocket, not to hide it, but to keep it close. It wasn't the first time I'd been handed a bill for my presence, but this time I was going to make sure it came with change. Marcus came home just before 6, the sound of his car door closing, followed by the steady tread of his shoes on the walkway. From my seat at the kitchen table, I watched the front door open, the golden spill of evening light stretching across the floor before his frame filled it. He looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work alone, and when he spotted me, his smile was small but genuine. "Hey, Mama," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. The scent of his cologne lingered for a moment before Kayla's voice floated in from the hallway, bright and rehearsed. "Marcus, we need to talk about something after dinner." Her tone had that clipped efficiency of someone with a bullet point agenda. I didn't move. I just slid the folded utility sheet from my robe pocket and set it on the table between us. His eyes dropped to it, then back to my face. "What's this?" I kept my voice level. "A bill. Apparently I'm a line item now." Kayla entered the kitchen, hands clasped like she was about to lead a meeting. "It's just transparency," she said. "I keep track of our expenses, and when someone stays longer than a weekend, it's fair they contribute. It's not personal." "It's personal when it's delivered in an envelope under a fruit bowl," I replied. "That's not a conversation. That's a verdict." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "Kayla." "Marcus, we've talked about this," she interrupted, her eyes flicking between us. "Boundaries matter. If your mother is here for a week or more, it changes the budget. I'm just making sure everyone understands that." "Your budget doesn't scare me," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I've been paying bills longer than you've been breathing. If you needed help with the utilities, you could have asked me directly. But this?" I tapped the paper. "This feels like a reminder that I'm not welcome." Kayla's mouth tightened. "That's not what I'm saying." "It's exactly what you're saying," I countered. "You don't want me touching the TV, the thermostat, the chicken in your fridge. Now you're tallying the cost of the air I breathe in your house. If you're going to charge me rent, maybe we should discuss what I get for it." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting from me to her. "Can we all just—" "No," I said, sharper than I intended. We can't just anything until it's clear where I stand in this family. I came here because my son invited me, because I thought I still had a place in his home, and I won't be treated like a trespasser who has to justify every bite of food and every light switch. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Kayla crossed her arms, her chin lifting. I'm not trying to push you out, but I need structure in my home. Without it, I spiral. You bring unpredictability. I studied her for a long moment, seeing not just the stiffness in her posture, but the small, almost imperceptible quiver in her hands. Kayla, I said, softer now, life is unpredictable, family is unpredictable. If you can't make room for that, you're going to spend your life defending a fortress nobody wants to visit. Her eyes glistened for the briefest second before she looked away. Marcus stepped forward, resting a hand on my shoulder. Mama, can we agree to just meet in the middle? I glanced at him, then at Kayla. I'll pay for what I use, but I won't pay for the privilege of being unwelcome. If I'm here as family, not as a guest who has to keep receipts to prove her worth. I stood, leaving the folded sheet on the table. Dinner smells good. Let's eat before it gets cold. But in my mind, I knew the conversation wasn't over. The bill had been paid in words, but the real debt between us was still accruing interest. By Thursday, the house felt like it had its own weather system, still on the surface, but charged beneath, like the air before a summer storm. Every movement was careful, every word measured, every glance a small act of diplomacy. We were orbiting each other with the precision of planets that knew a collision was coming. That morning, I woke before dawn again, restless in the trundle bed. I padded to the guest room window, looking out at the magnolia tree in the front yard, its blossoms beginning to brown at the edges. Even beauty had a way of turning brittle here. I decided I needed a walk to clear my head. The neighborhood was quiet, the pavement damp from a night rain. By the time I came back, Marcus was already gone for work, and Nora was in the kitchen with a juice box, swinging her legs at the table. Kayla was at the counter, packing Nora's lunch with an efficiency that could have been mistaken for care if not for the tension in her shoulders. Morning, I said, setting my keys on the counter. Morning, she replied, eyes on the sandwich she was cutting into exact triangles. I poured myself coffee from my own small pot, a habit now, almost a ritual. She didn't comment, but I felt her attention on me all the same. Grandma, Nora said between sips, can you come to ballet tomorrow? We're doing our recital practice. My heart lifted. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Kayla hesitated, then looked at me. It's during school hours. You'd have to sign in at the front office. I can handle that, I said, meeting her gaze. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Fine. It was the smallest word, but it carried the weight of permission, as if I'd asked to borrow something fragile. After we dropped Nora off, the drive back was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Back at the house, I started in on a load of laundry, humming under my breath. That's when I heard it, the faint crinkle of paper on the kitchen counter. There, half covered by the fruit bowl, was another envelope, my name again. Inside, a typed list, house rules, updated. Each item numbered, neat, deliberate. Don't adjust the thermostat without asking. No television before 6 p.m. Keep personal food in designated cooler space. Use kitchen only during agreed upon times. I read it twice. Then I set it down, slowly, carefully, like it was a live wire. When Kayla walked in moments later, I was still at the counter. You left me some homework, I said, tapping the list. She didn't flinch. It's just so we're all on the same page. Pages are for books, Kayla, I said evenly. This is a home. And a home isn't worth living in if you have to keep score every time someone breathes. Her chin lifted. You think I'm being unreasonable. I think, I said, you've built a system so tight it's strangling the people in it. We stood there, the space between us charged, neither of us willing to break eye contact. And in that moment, I knew we were past diplomacy. Tomorrow was going to be the day, because there's only so much a person can take before they stop defending and start advancing, and I was already leaning forward. Friday dawned with that strange mix of anticipation and dread that comes before a performance, whether it's on a stage or in a kitchen. I woke early, sat with my coffee by the guest room window, and watched the magnolia tree sway in the faint breeze. Today was Nora's recital practice. She'd been talking about it all week, the excitement lighting up her face every time she mentioned her tutu or the music. That alone was enough to make me determined to show up, no matter what walls her mother had built between us. When I came into the kitchen, Kayla was already there, hair immaculate, keys on the counter, lunch bag in hand. She glanced at me like she was checking for contraband. You're still coming? She asked. Yes, I said simply. She asked me. It's just, we have a system for drop-off and visitors. The school is strict. I smiled faintly. I raised a son through 3 decades of PTA politics and bake sale sign-ups. I think I can handle the front office. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. Marcus, perhaps sensing the thin ice beneath us, kissed my cheek and left without weighing in. At the school, I signed in, the receptionist handing me a bright orange visitor's badge as though it were a medal. I walked into the small auditorium just as the music began. Nora spotted me immediately and waved so hard her little arm looked ready to detach. My heart swelled. Kayla was on the other side of the room, phone in hand, recording with that posture of ownership she carried into everything. After the practice, Nora skipped over, still in her ballet slippers. Grandma, did you see me? You were perfect, I said, crouching to her level. Better than perfect. Kayla joined us, her smile for Nora warm and easy, her glance at me less so. We need to get going. Back at the house, the silence settled like dust. Nora went to a room to change, and I headed to the kitchen to start lunch. My own groceries, my own pot. The hiss of onions and butter filled the air, cutting through the lemon cleaner. Kayla appeared in the doorway. You know you're using my pan. I looked at the skillet, then back at her. It's a pan, Kayla. It doesn't take sides. Her arms crossed. It's about respecting the boundaries we've set. Boundaries keep people safe, I said, but they also keep people out. And from where I'm standing, you've mistaken keeping control for keeping peace. She took a step closer, eyes narrowing. And from where I'm standing, you've mistaken ignoring the rules for being some kind of noble stand. I turned down the burner, meeting her gaze. I didn't come here to fight. But I also didn't come here to be managed into silence. If you want me gone, say it. Otherwise, accept that I'm part of this family, and families don't run on lists and ledgers. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Marcus walked in. He stopped, sensing the charge in the room. What's going on? I didn't break eye contact with her. We're deciding whether this house is a home or a set of instructions. Something in her face shifted, just barely, but enough for me to see she'd heard me. It wasn't the final word, not yet, but it was the first time I felt the ground tilt in my favor, and I knew the next move would decide everything. The next morning felt different before I even opened my eyes. It was quieter, not in the usual tense way, but in that hushed space right before a verdict is handed down. I could hear the faint clink of mugs in the kitchen, the low murmur of Marcus's voice, Kayla's softer reply. When I walked in, they were both at the table, Marcus with his coffee, Kayla with her tea, a legal pad between them. There was a column of notes in Kayla's handwriting, precise as stitches. "Morning," I said, and sat down without asking if the seat was taken. Kayla looked at me directly, something she'd avoided all week. "We've been talking," she began, and her voice didn't have that usual edge. "About how this week has gone and about what we want our home to be like when family visits." Marcus nodded, leaning forward. "Mama, I don't like the tension. I want you to feel welcome here, but I also want Kay to feel like this is still her home when people are visiting. We need a middle ground." I folded my hands on the table. A home is big enough for more than one way of doing things, but it's not big enough for resentment. If I'm here as family, not as a house guest who gets a rule book. Kayla's gaze didn't waver. "I can agree to that, but I need to feel like my space is respected. That doesn't mean you can't cook or touch the fridge or turn on the TV. It means I won't feel blindsided in my own kitchen." "That," I said slowly, "sounds like a start." We sat in a silence that for the first time didn't feel like a contest. Later that afternoon, I made lunch. My collard greens, my cornbread, my fried chicken. I cooked with the kitchen door wide open, the air warm with the smell of something shared instead of rationed. Kayla came in, took a plate without comment, and for a long moment we ate at the same table with Nora between us, chattering about school and her recital. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was the first meal where I didn't feel like I was trespassing, and maybe that's all a truce is. Both sides deciding the fight isn't worth more than what's left to protect. I knew this wouldn't be the last test between us, but as I watched Kayla help Nora butter her cornbread, I thought, for now, the door's open, and I intend to keep it that way. The week wound down, not with a bang, but with the slow, careful exhale of two people deciding they'd had enough of holding their breath. Sunday morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen like a promise, soft and gold, warming the edges of the countertops. I was at the stove making pancakes, Nora's request, when Marcus walked in, hair still damp from the shower, looking lighter than he had in days. He kissed my cheek, poured himself coffee, and leaned against the counter, just watching for a moment. Kayla appeared a few minutes later, still in her robe, the faintest trace of sleep in her eyes. She didn't reach for her phone. Instead, she got plates down from the cabinet without a word, set them on the table, and asked if I needed more butter. It was such a small thing, but it landed like an olive branch. I nodded. "Yes, thank you." Nora bounced in, hair wild, grinning at the stack of pancakes like it was a treasure. We all sat at the table. No lists, no envelopes, no invisible boundaries fencing us in. The air felt normal. Not perfect, not fixed, but breathable. After breakfast, Marcus took Nora to the park, and I found myself alone with Kayla at the sink, washing dishes in quiet rhythm. She dried a plate, set it aside, and then said without looking at me, "I'm not used to sharing space. I get controlling. It's not an excuse, but I know it's hard to be here and feel like you're under inspection." I glanced at her, studying the way her shoulders rounded just slightly like she'd set something heavy down. "I wasn't here to judge your home," I said. "I just didn't want to be treated like a stranger in my son's life." She nodded, still drying. "You're not a stranger." A pause, then quieter. "And I don't want you to feel like one." It wasn't a full surrender, but it was enough. That afternoon, when I packed my suitcase, Nora slipped a drawing into the side pocket, the four of us at the table, smiling. with "my family" scrawled across the top. I smoothed the paper, folded it gently, and thought, maybe this house has more room than either of us believed. As Marcus hugged me goodbye at the door, he whispered, "Thanks for standing your ground, Mama, and for not burning the place down while you did it." I smiled. Baby, I was never here to burn it down, just to open the windows. Walking away, suitcase rolling behind me, I realized something. In families, victory doesn't always look like someone winning. Sometimes it's just everyone deciding to stay at the table, and for now, that was enough.